This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us today on this Friday's program, we have K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. As always, he covers this week's grain market update and explains the recent changes in grain market futures, some of the decreases that we have recently seen. Also ahead, Tawnie Larson is the project coordinator for the Kansas Agribility Project, and she shares with listeners best practices when it comes to farming with arthritis. We end this Friday's program with the Kansas Profile from the director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at K-State, Ron Wilson. He shares with us a local business of interest, specifically dealing with Wagyu beef. That and more awaits us ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back for our weekly segment on our grain market report update, and we have with us Dan O'Brien as usual. He is our grain market economist here at K-State. So Dan, thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's start off, as always, like we do with our futures market. I know that they've fallen from their highs, but you are warning not to be too pessimistic about this.
Well, yes. As you and I were talking before we came on the air, we think that with dry weather forecast off into the future that we could see strength coming back in on the market. So if we were cheering only for prices, that'd be a great thing for selling prices. However, on the other side of dry weather is that it's a challenge to crop producers across the country. So I think overall, when I've thought about it, it'd be nice to have lots of bushels with decent prices. That seems to be the half medium. But as you look at it, here we closed on corn futures yesterday at $7.47 for the July contract. So now, in terms of going off the board in its delivery period, we're really paying more attention to the September contract for setting basis levels, et cetera. And that closed at $6.09. So 6.09's fair amount lower than when we were up close to $7.50, $7.75 for the top end of contract prices in early May. So we've fallen actually below $6 on that contract, down to about $5.80. Now we're back to $6.09. So that recovery is somewhat welcome. When you do look at the weekly corn futures, there's a RSI index that we follow. That's a measure of the momentum in the markets, and that's fallen to about 35 on its indices, and 50 is a neutral market. So when you get down to basically 30, then you're pretty much a bearish market. And you can ask the question, well, what happened? We haven't seen that much change out in the field. In fact, we've got some problems out in the field. I think this fall off is in all the grain markets has coincided with the challenges that have been happening in the financial markets, worries about inflation, higher interest rates, all the above, and it's caused investors to seek to put their money where they feel safest, but they're pulling money generally out of commodities, and ag commodities. Corn gets involved in that. Of course, we saw that fall, as we talked about, in corn. For soybeans, we also have fallen off quite a bit, had fallen from a close yesterday for the August contract, now the lead contract of $15.85 and a quarter, had been up to about $17 in the high during this recent rally. Had fallen down actually as low as, say, $14.25 or so, and are now back up to a little higher prices. So we've got issues going on also in the longer-term soybean contracts. That same 35 index for the RSI that we'd seen for corn, we're down to about 34. Surprisingly, almost the same lower momentum, which shows somewhat the generalized move hitting all the ag that's affected soybean futures. I just would add in for that same number also for wheat futures, this Chicago wheat down to about 38. And again, we'd fallen on prices from about $13.75 to close yesterday of about $8.89, or about just under $9. We just have seen across these major grain futures contracts that we follow a decrease in momentum and general malaise in the overall economic outlook, and that's affected the grains. I would say, again, as you and I talked about before we got on air, that even though the futures prices have fallen off, the local basis levels in Kansas have responded tremendously. You look at the basis charts we have on Ag Manager, we've set, in essence, for the corn basis numbers, we watch basically 6 locations across the state, and we are either at or above the tightest, most positive basis levels that we've seen since 2018. And the jump up that's happened isn't just a slight change, it's been almost a vertical move to the high side. So to me, that's showing that even though the futures and those that trade the futures are generally thinking pessimistically because of these broader macroeconomic factors about all commodity prices, still at the local level in Kansas, we have buyers coming in who are willing to pay a lot more than again, that's not a very scientific term, but they're willing to express themselves in the cash market in a way that basis has strengthened tremendously. So as much as the futures have fallen off, basis has come to the high side. So we have cash bids, say for corn in Colby of $1.55 over basis, in Garden City $1.80 over, 90 over in Salina, Topeka $1 over, Hutchinson $1.11 over, $1.25 over in Columbus. And so these are all tremendous cash bids. Still strong new crop bids out in the western part of the state, positive basis of 20 over for new crop forward contract in Colby, and 45 over in Garden City. So pretty strong. And we even have some positive basis numbers for soybeans. And that's been a rarity, at least the bids that I had seen out of Topeka, out of Hutchinson, out of Columbus, all on the positive side. So as soybean futures have dropped off, we've seen the local cash markets, and not just local cash markets, because a lot of this is export demand, buyers internationally coming in and driving up prices over, contrary to the trend in the futures. So now our attention switches from the futures only, in some cases, as people watch those markets, over to what the local bids are. So, and that's a good thing. We should add in, while we're talking about this, that yes, during wheat harvest, right now we're not seeing tremendous wheat basis bids. In fact, that when you look at that whole complex, the futures have fallen off, closing yesterday at $8.89 for the September futures contract. And again, they had been around $13.75 earlier on, so they've fallen tremendously. But again, we're in the midst of harvest. The basis bids for wheat, even in the midst of a decent harvest, aren't just terrible. You've got the highest bid that I had seen yesterday, $8.74 in Hutchinson, $8.70 in Salina, $8.40 Colby, $8.64 Topeka, even $8.44 even in Garden City, and that's in the midst of wheat to be sold, coming out of the field. So, pardon me, this overall world situation of tight wheat supplies is a big deal. So,
absolutely. And
anyway, just interesting to look at all those trends and see how they work out.
Absolutely. And, in terms of wheat harvest going on, we're about towards the end here. So really the fact that we're just now seeing these drastic changes, it's not too bad considering what it could have been, right?
That would be my perspective. It all depends on our point of reference. If you look at an $8.89 futures bid and cash prices of $8.40 to $8.70 from the reference point of where we were the last 3 or 4 years, these would be unbelievable prices. But we're looking at them so often in reference to what we just had seen in the last 2 or 3 months, and that's a lot lower price, $2 lower probably in a lot of the local areas. So we're still over cost of production, and so perhaps I guess until you have the bushels in hand, a lot of it is not as real as when we now do have the bushels in hand and have these prices to look at.
We're hoping for some certainty here, but in terms of some of the uncertainty that we've still been shown we're probably going to have, our weather has not been our friend in terms of some of the reports we're hearing right now. There's
a lot of concern about where weather patterns in the U.S. go for the rest of summer. Respected climate analysts at DTN, if I can quote them, and other independent weather prognosticators have indicated their expectations of after some moisture coming up in the next week or so, that generally they expect to see hot, dry conditions for the rest of the summer. You add that to some information we've got in our notes on Ag Manager that show that the current predicted soil moisture numbers for the period that we're in aren't that good through, in western half of Kansas, almost all Nebraska, all but the northeast part of Iowa, almost all of Illinois, Indiana, the western half, on into southern Minnesota. These are all key production areas for corn and soybeans in the United States, and they're dry already, and we have some risk, and not a trifling risk, some real risk of hot, dry weather coming in for the foreseeable future through the rest of this growing season. So we're not trying to talk the futures up, but all that drop-off that we'd seen in corn and soybeans, a lot of it driven by financial markets, it's likely, very, very likely, that if these weather issues come into play, as we're thinking that they could, that we'd see a strengthening of those markets going forward. And then if that happens in corn and soybeans, then what happens to wheat? Do we go up in sympathy with that? We might. It's harder to say that that'll be in play. I would also add in, we have a WASDE report coming out next week. And I don't know what you've been hearing in terms of media reports on that, but I haven't heard a lot of discussion about that report yet. Coming out of the quarterly stocks reports that we just had here at the end of June, there could be some changes in feed usage for corn and some other things. But overall, the July report's important, but it's not as important as the ones coming up in August and September and October, November, when we have better numbers from farmer surveys and some field measurements of what crop size is here for these fall harvested crops. So I guess we'll see where it all goes, Samantha, but it's not necessarily welcome news as we let off our talk that we see some prospects for higher prices if those prospects are tied in with tighter conditions and perhaps challenging yields for farmers in the U.S. in coming months.
As you mentioned, that WASDE report, it's going to be coming out July 12th, but we will be covering that next Friday in addition to our normal update that we do every week anyways, so stay tuned for that. That was Dan O'Brien, our grain market economist here at K-State with this week's Grain Market Report. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with Tawnie Larson. She is the project coordinator with the Kansas Agribility Project, and she's going to be talking to us today about farming with arthritis, which for those of you listening may or may not be an issue that you are currently dealing with, but it's one that's quite prevalent among producers, and I feel like it's one that people probably work through quite a bit often than they should be. So Tawnie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to talk about this important subject that does affect a lot of Kansans and people that work with their hands and work out in the fields. And even though it may be a simple task, sometimes arthritis keeps us from continuing to do what we like to do. But as we all know, farmers are hard workers, and a lot of times they will work through that pain. And so I hope today we can give some ideas on different tasks or different ways of operations to relieve some of that joint pain and give some relief.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, let's start with kind of defining some symptoms of arthritis or what people can expect if they're thinking, well, maybe I have arthritis or maybe I've just been working too long and too hard a days. What can people expect?
Right. So sometimes people don't realize if it's actually arthritis that has set in. Really, someone needs to talk to their healthcare provider and have a diagnosis. If you are having joint pain, that may be because of arthritis or some other things. But I think that these same types of tools would be helpful regardless of what the diagnosis would be, or it's more about how you feel and what you can do on some different steps to take to relieve some of these issues people are having.
Absolutely. Anything to help mitigate pain in the long run, I think, is
absolutely
so important and so beneficial, especially when we think about the long days that our producers have most of the time. So first and foremost, let's start with some of the basic tips that people should keep in mind when it comes to safety and handling and just mitigating these issues.
So some of the important things are to plan your day, and that looks like anything from working in the mornings when it's a little bit cooler, doing harder tasks in the mornings, maybe something that takes a little bit more strength or even more fine motor skills when you're a little bit sharper and haven't been out working in the field all day, and then try to come back and, okay, now I'm going to work on fixing the tractor. Mm-hmm. I think frustrations levels get a little bit higher, and it's just a good idea to try and work different tasks at the best time of the day for you, because everybody may be different. Maybe it's more relaxing to work on the tractor in the evenings. But overall, just planning is really one of the best things that somebody can do to make a successful day and feel better and have time at the end of the day to go do the things that they enjoy doing.
I think efficiency is key when we think about some of these things. So considering if you're going out to one pasture and then you're like, well, I forgot this one tool that I needed, maybe pre-thinking those things is something that producers should keep in mind.
Absolutely. One of the tools that we often recommend is to have a 5-gallon bucket. Everybody has them around the farm. And gather your tools for the day. And think about where you're going to go and what you might need. Maybe you take a few more tools, but it saves you a trip back to the shop. And, that's frustration building as well. But it's also nice to save steps, even if you're close by, working around the house, just making 15 trips back up to the barn. You have to get up off the ground or, wherever you're at and then go back in, find the tool. So planning and thinking ahead really does make a difference.
Absolutely. And then when we're thinking about some of these tools that producers are using on a daily basis, some of these tools aren't the most comfortable things in the world to handle, especially when you're dealing with arthritis.
Absolutely. So one of the tools that we recommend, and everybody probably knows what vet wrap is. It comes in some bright colors. They even have purple, which is fantastic. So one of the things we recommend is to use the vet wrap and wrap tools like screwdrivers, hammer handles, that kind of thing, so that you can make them a little bit bigger in circumference. And that also makes it easier to hang on to. It's a cushiony type feeling, so it doesn't hurt as much. Sometimes there's other tools that you can use to relieve that repetitive motion. So the other types of tools that could be used would be automatic or self-adjusting tools, such as ratchets, power tools, air tools, and that type of thing to prevent that stress and repetitive motion, especially if you already have some pain. But it's also a good idea to use some of these tools and things that we're talking about today to avoid getting arthritis or getting that pain. And, some say arthritis is hereditary. I'm not exactly sure about that, but I think there's also things that farmers and ranchers can do when they're young to avoid creating arthritis. If you have a bad knee, is that hereditary or is it because you jumped off too many tractors?
Sure.
And tailgates and that kind of thing. So that's probably my mantra, is to ask people to avoid jumping off of equipment at all ages.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything you can do, especially if young producers are tuning in and listening to this, anything you can do now to help prevent those pains and aches later on in life, I think is always a good idea. Preventative medicine in that sort of way.
Exactly.
I know that another tool that you brought in for me visually to help aid in this conversation is a pair of gloves. So gloves can also be something that's really beneficial in terms of arthritis.
Right. So a lot of times people think about gloves as just protecting your hands when you're out in the field. But a glove that is kind of like a motorcycle glove, it's heavy, it helps absorb the vibration. So even though you might think you didn't do anything today because you sat on the tractor, you sat inside your box, which isn't, very much bigger than your body, and you sat there and held on to the steering wheel, and it vibrated all day long. And so one of the things that you can do to help avoid the fatigue that you can feel at the end of the day is to wear these gloves. And it really does make a difference. And they can be found at pretty much any hardware store. It's just something that has extra padding, not just your typical leather work gloves. Mm-hmm. And something else that's really important is to check your seat of your equipment, because a suspension seat will go a long ways to making you feel better, your back, your neck. And if you have a bad seat or an old seat, like if you can see the foam and you've got duct tape all over it, then it would be a good idea to get a brand new seat.
Absolutely. Anytime you can use cushions of any sort. I know that, producers are sometimes down on their knees during the day. They're trying to get into certain nooks and crannies to fix certain equipment. So cushions can be of benefit as well.
Absolutely. And you can use any type of device that you would like. I mean, it can be an old blanket. It can be a piece of foam or whatever to just take that pressure off of those joints, especially knees and back. And it just makes it more comfortable and then less painful later in the day.
And then when we think about our producers at the end of the day in terms of they're wrapping up and they're feeling these aches and pains, should they be stretching and kind of working out some of these pains that they have?
That's a great idea. I think stretching all parts of your body, even as you get up in the morning. And, I'm not saying you have to go to yoga, but we do have some farmer yoga from other agribility states. But stretching your hands out, just kind of bending them back throughout the day will make a difference. It helps get that, lubricates the joints and helps throughout the day, as well as stretching your legs and your back and your shoulders. So, wherever you're going to start out for the day, take a seat and stretch a little bit here and there, move your body around, get out and walk around a little bit if you can. If you have a stopping point, stretch your legs, and you'll probably feel better at the end of the day. And like I said before, the idea is that you have a work day. Sometimes they're really long, but it's important to be able to enjoy the things with your family and friends.
Absolutely. And Tawnie, I know you mentioned that your individual's doctor should be the first point of contact when it comes to dealing with these issues, of course. But you all at the Kansas Agribility Project obviously have an amplitude of resources for producers to utilize. So where can they find some of those resources at?
So we have a website that is www.agribility.ksu.edu, and we have tip sheets under our resources. I also have some booklets that our national organization has produced, and I'd be happy to send those out to anyone that is interested. I have one on gardening, and the other is arthritis and agriculture, and the Arthritis Foundation has also been involved in these publications, and so we feel like it's a really good source, and I'd be happy to send them out. So on our website is my contact information, so someone can send me an email, and I'll stick something in the mail.
Absolutely. And as always, those resources will be in the show notes of today's episode, which can be found on agtoday.net. So we will have the link to the Kansas Agribility Project website, as well as the Agribility email that you can contact Tawnie at. So Tawnie, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I know we're going to be talking with you here in the future again soon, covering some topics regarding heat and how producers can stay safe and stay comfortable during these warmer summer months. So we'll be hearing from you again soon.
Great. I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Once again, that was Tawnie Larson. She is the project coordinator with the Kansas Agribility Project. Before we cut to a break, just a friendly reminder that we're really focusing on water conservation this July month of 2022. And that doesn't exclude next week. So next week we will have with us Dr. Susan Metzger. She has been named the director of K-Care. And if you aren't familiar with the work that K-Care does, K-Care was established in order to help enhance the research, extension, and teaching of activities that focus on environmental issues relating to agriculture. So one of those issues specifically being water. Part of that includes the Kansas Water Resource Institute, which develops and supports research on high-priority water source problems and objectives. So that will be the bulk of our conversation next week, as well as Susan's new role at K-Care. So we are certainly looking forward to that interview, and once again, that will be next week on Wednesday's program. Otherwise, we will be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We usually wrap up our Friday programming with our meteorologist Chip Redmond, but he is currently unavailable this week to give us our weekly weather report, so we are filling this time with the latest from the Kansas Profile with Ron Wilson.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. Building better beef, that's one goal of an innovative Kansas entrepreneur who is using a unique breed of cattle and careful quality control to create a remarkable beef-eating experience for consumers. It's today's Kansas Profile. Dave Dreiling is the founder and owner of Booth Creek Wagyu. As we have previously profiled, Dave is a successful entrepreneur who studied business at K-State. He met and married Kristen Spaeth. Dave founded GTM, the sportswear company, and also owns numerous restaurants. In 2008, he bought a Pottawatomie County ranch primarily for deer hunting. Through the years, he expanded the property, now known as Booth Creek Ranch. Meanwhile, Dave's uncle raised greyhounds near Abilene and had started raising beef cattle as well, including some cows that had been bred to a bull from a Japanese breed known as Wagyu. We got some of this beef and fell in love with it, Dave said. They found it to be especially tender and flavorful. Dave went to his uncle's dispersal sale with the intention of buying one animal, but ended up purchasing 4 full-blood Wagyu and 28 Wagyu embryos. My intent was to buy a few head to have great beef for family and friends, Dave said. The more Dave learned about Wagyu, the more he became convinced about the potential of the breed and the opportunities to upgrade beef consumption. There aren't a lot of Wagyu producers, Dave said. One was a cattle company in California which was shipping them to Kansas to be fed and then shipping them back to be processed, Dave said. Kansas is a better place to raise cattle, Dave said. Why couldn't we do this here all the way through? So Booth Creek Wagyu became the basis for a vertically integrated beef production operation from the genetics and production all the way through to processing, sales, and distribution. This would assure quality control through the entire process. They purchased a meat processing business now known as Meatworks in Riley. In March 2022, they opened a Booth Creek Wagyu retail store and sampling kitchen in East Manhattan. What makes Wagyu beef exceptional? It's all about the marbling, which contributes to taste and tenderness, Dave said. Then I stumbled on the health benefits, he said. Most of the fat is unsaturated, he said. Wagyu beef is higher in omega-3s and 6s than salmon and is lower in cholesterol than chicken, he said. I've heard our store described as a jewelry store for beef because we offer lots of choices, Dave said. Booth Creek Wagyu sells beef cuts at the silver, gold, and platinum levels, with the higher levels featuring higher amounts of marbling. USDA prime beef is 8 to 12% IMF, while a platinum full-blood Wagyu would be 26% IMF or more. That makes a rich steak, so people might not eat as much of it, Dave said. Wagyu is like coffee these days. People have lots of different preferences. Some want dark roast, some want it lighter, and no one is wrong, he said. Some beef consumers prefer more tenderness, and some want less fat, he said. He's devised a camera system that takes an electronic image of each cut of meat, and the image is transmitted to Japan for grading. We know where every steak comes from and how it grades, Dave said. The Booth Creek Wagyu store includes a sampling kitchen so people can decide what level of marbling they prefer. We want to help people dial in on what kind of beef they like, Dave said. His intent is to build on the Manhattan store and open additional Wagyu stores and sampling kitchens across the region and the nation. All of the store's Wagyu beef originates at Booth Creek Ranch, located near the rural community of Oldsburg, population 219 people. Now that's rural. For more information, go to www.boothcreekwagyu.com. That's Booth Creek Wagyu, WAGYU.com. Can beef be better? That's become a passion for this Kansas entrepreneur. We commend Dave Dreiling and all those involved with Booth Creek Wagyu for making a difference with innovative production and marketing. We're glad he's making a business of building better beef. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
Once again, that was Ron Wilson, the director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University, with the latest Kansas Profile covering Booth Creek Wagyu. We will be back with more next week. For Agriculture Today, I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network.